Hello, welcome everybody to today's CLE webinar. We'll be giving everyone a minute or two here to join. So if you'd like to sign on and get settled in, we'll kick off here shortly. Looks like we still have some folks joining, so we'll give it another minute or so for everybody to log on. All right, about 30 more seconds for any more joiners or last minute attendees. Give everybody a chance to sign on. All right, I think we'll go ahead and get started. We'll be initially covering some housekeeping items anyway to start, so I think we can go ahead and get started and kind of kick us off here. So first of all, hello everyone. Welcome to Litera's CLE webinar. Thank you for taking the time to join us today for our CLE on mitigating document risks through automated drafting and review. As I mentioned, we'll go ahead and start with some housekeeping items for everybody. First is in regard to CLE credit. So everyone must individually register for this course via the registration page and also individually participate in the polling throughout. So if you're in a group setting right now and haven't individually registered, or you're not able to individually participate in the polling, then we won't be able to track your attendance and participation. So please register and participate on your own computer. The link to the registration page, I believe, is in the chat or will be in the chat shortly for anyone who needs to quickly register and sign in to the webinar and participate in the polling throughout. And related to that, throughout the CLE, there will be a few polling questions. There's no right or wrong answer, but you must answer the polling questions if you'd like to be eligible for CLE credit, because this helps for attendance and participation. And regarding the CLE credit hours, at the conclusion of today's webinar, eligible participants will receive an email with a request to complete an affidavit. Once that affidavit is completed, you'll receive an email with your CLE certificate. We've applied for credit in California, Illinois, New Jersey, New York, and Pennsylvania. For those states, when you receive your CLE certificate, if we received approval at the time of certificate issuance, it'll state approved. If it's still pending approval, it'll state applied for, and then when it's approved, you'll get another certificate that states approved. And then lastly, for other states, I believe the certificate will say self-apply, and you can self-apply in most other states following the relevant self-apply guidelines for that state. We'll cover this process again at the end of the CLE as a reminder to the group. And then lastly, at the end of the CLE, a survey will appear at the end of this program. We'd love to have your feedback. It'll be helpful for us as we continue to develop new CLEs and offer them for you. And with regard to the webinar itself, we're scheduled for 60 minutes. Everyone is muted to avoid any inadvertent background noise, but if you have any questions, you can enter them in the questions panel. We'll be keeping an eye on the questions, but we may have to address them at the end to make sure we have enough time to cover the presentation. And for questions that we don't address, we'll follow up with an email with our response. Our session's also being recorded, and you'll receive an email with a link to the recording. Please note, with regard to the recording, for Litera customers, you should be able to access the on-demand recording via Litera University, which is our learning management system. and you can complete the course there for CLE credit. For all other registrants, we're making the video available for viewing purposes only, and you'll receive a link to access that as well. All right, so now that we've got the housekeeping out of the way, we'll go into introductions. My name is David Rodgers. I'm a former practicing attorney in both private practice at a law firm and in-house. I've been in the legal industry and legal tech combined for over 15 years. For about the last 4 years, I've been with Litera in a few different capacities. I'm currently a senior enablement program manager, and I'm helping lead our recently revamped CLE program with accredited CLE courses. I'll turn it over now to my co-presenter, Alejandro, to introduce himself.
Awesome. Thank you, David. Hello, everyone. My name is Alejandro Aguayo. I'm actually part of the sales engineering team here at Litera, so I'll be doing the demonstration for today. But I've been with Litera for, I want to say for a while now. I actually started off in our support team and in my current role for today. So looking forward for today's discussion and also our presentation for today. Thank you, David.
Great. Thank you, Alejandro. So now we'll get into the agenda for today. So we've got 5 main areas that we'll cover. The first is an overview of what we feel are some of the main areas of the model rules related to technology competency. Then we'll cover some of the manual workflows that many legal professionals use today and why it's risky, with some examples of mistakes that can happen. And then next, Alejandro will briefly discuss ways that the risk can be mitigated through utilizing legal technology. And then I think it's also important to talk about some of the recent technological developments that impact the legal industry. And then lastly, Alejandro will provide a little more context around tools that can be leveraged to automate document drafting and review. So with that, we'll kick off with an interesting story. I think the saying goes, one of the best ways to learn is through a mistake, but better yet, hopefully somebody else's mistake. And this story isn't about a legal document per se, but it involves a drafting error that's both embarrassing and costly, which is something we all want to avoid in our legal practice. As most of you probably know, this is a picture of Steph Curry. He's one of the most popular basketball players of all time and arguably the best three-point shooter in the history of the game. And a big part of basketball is sneaker culture. The world's top shoe brands partner with high-profile athletes, which can be a very lucrative partnership for both the shoe brand and the athlete. And Steph originally signed with Nike, when his contract was approaching, he and his father, Dell, who also played in the NBA, met with Nike to discuss a renewal. And the meeting even started off poorly when a Nike team member called Steph Stefan instead of Stephen, or even just Steph as he's known throughout the league. But the bigger mistake, as the story goes, was found in the presentation itself. The presentation materials that were provided to Steph and his father mistakenly had another basketball player's name on it. It was Kevin Durant, who's also a popular NBA player and had recently renewed his contract with Nike. It was clear to Steph and his father that Nike repurposed the presentation materials and had mistakenly left Kevin's name in them. Later on, Steph and his father stated that seeing Kevin Durant's name in the presentation materials caused them to stop paying attention to the presentation at that point, and they lost interest in Nike. Ultimately, Steph Curry instead decided to sign with Under Armour, which was seeking to gain traction in the market share and gain market share in the basketball shoe industry. It's not known for certain if this particular drafting error is what ultimately caused Steph Curry to leave Nike and sign with Under Armour, but it's certainly possible other factors were at play, but it couldn't have helped Nike, and I'm sure Nike would have liked to avoid that mistake. Steph has gone on to win multiple awards, NBA championships, league MVP, and it's estimated by some media outlets that Nike lost approximately $14 billion in revenue by failing to re-sign Steph Curry to a shoe deal. So this is sort of an example of how a drafting mistake can have embarrassing and costly consequences. And I hope you can kind of see some of the parallels in this story to some of the drafting mistakes that can occur in the legal industry. The reality is that attorneys are creatures of habit. If a previous document has worked and has been successful for a client in the past, that document's often repurposed and reused for another client. And it's not necessarily a negative thing. It's important to have time-saving methods, and they can lead to successful outcomes, but it needs to be done correctly. But leaving the wrong name, or dollar amount or outdated and incorrect information based on a previous client matter is, one of our worst nightmares as we're creating our work product for our clients. So with that, we'll jump into here some model rules on technology. And first, I think we'll talk a little bit about the model rules in general. So we're all licensed in different jurisdictions, and some jurisdictions may not have adopted the model rules or a version of the model rules with a specific tech requirement. But it's safe to say that legal technology is a reality in the legal industry, and clients have an expectation that attorneys will leverage some form of legal technology. So whether you're an in-house counsel or at a law firm, just the realities are that legal technology is a requirement in practice these days. So even if there isn't a specific tech requirement or tech CLE that's necessary for your practice, the reality is the legal industry is adopting technology to increase efficiency. But with that, we'll jump into a story here about the ABA model rules and sort of an interesting link on technology and the 1983 model rules. So the images shown are some of the technology that was used in connection with the Watergate scandal. So you might be saying, what's the link from Watergate to the model rules? Well, according to some, the 1983 model rules were adopted in part because of concerns over the legal profession's ability to govern itself as a result of the attorneys who were involved in the Watergate scandal and who were leveraging some of this surveillance technology. And there's also just a general sentiment that the rules needed to be updated due to significant changes in the legal profession over the preceding nearly 100 years. Prior to the 1983 rules, the ABA had the 1969 Model Code of Professional Responsibility, which was essentially just a restatement of the 1908 Canons of Professional Ethics. And that was essentially just a restatement of the 1887 Alabama Code, which was the first codified system by the governor of Alabama. So essentially up till 1983, the rules governing the legal profession were essentially restatements of canons of principles from the 1800s. So following the Watergate scandal, the ABA created the Kutak Commission to help promulgate new model rules. And currently most states have their own version of professional rules, but all states have adopted some form or version of the ABA model rules. So it's just a little history around the linkage between Watergate and some of the tech that was used that essentially led to the 1983 model rules. And now we'll get into some of the specifics on the model rules. So the model rules are organized into sections by topic areas, and the main one we'll discuss today is Section 1, the client-lawyer relationship. And within Section 1, Rule 1.1 covers competency. And this is a long-standing requirement for attorneys to provide competent representation to clients. We all know that we should be competent in the area of law that we practice in. For example, for tax attorneys, we should know the tax code. If for personal injury lawyers, we should know that area within tort law. So this is a fairly broad requirement, but within the comments of Rule 1.1, the ABA provides some guidance on what exactly this means. And so with regard to technology, in Comment 8, Comment 8 requires attorneys to stay current with changes in law and practice. In 2012, the ABA amended Comment 8 to include the benefits and risks associated with relevant technology as a requirement for maintaining competence. So now we're seeing a specific reference to technology competence in the practice of law. And we're also going to see how quickly states are adopting this requirement. So you can see here, in 1983, the model rules were adopted, and there wasn't a lot of activity with regard to technology requirement. Once Comment 8 was implemented, you can see how quickly states began adopting that requirement. And currently, there's 39 to 40 states that have a technology requirement. and you can see here sort of a visualization. This visualization includes Louisiana because of an opinion issued by the Louisiana State Bar. So about 39 to 40 states have a technology requirement of some sort. And the next slide here is on sort of another example to bring a little levity to the CLE today. Even if a state hasn't specifically adopted a technology requirement, so this is just a reminder about the importance of staying current with technology, as shown here by the I'm Not a Cat lawyer. So COVID really accelerated the timeline for adopting virtual conference technology. And in early 2021, an attorney making an appearance in court had the sort of unfortunate experience of becoming a viral social media meme for using his assistant's computer that was allegedly last used by that assistant's daughter, who had a cat filter on Zoom and was unable to remove it for the court appearance. So this is sort of just an example about the realities of staying current with technology, so to effectively represent your clients and hopefully avoid embarrassing mistakes, even if you aren't seeking to fulfill a specific model rule requirement. Now on to the next model rule here, Rule 1.1. This relates to attorneys and legal fees. This is relevant because legal technology should be leveraged in a way that helps lawyers become more efficient to avoid charging clients for unreasonable fees. Speaking from personal experience, when I was in law school, we were still in the days of reviewing case law in the library and checking pocket parts for case updates and manually shepherdizing cases to make sure there's still good law. But nowadays, I think it's reasonable for clients to expect for that to be done more efficiently and conduct legal research online and leverage some of the shepherdizing technology tools and features that are available. It's not lost on me though that attorneys typically bill based on hours worked. So it's sort of a balancing act on how to effectively increase efficiency in a way that promotes profitability. At the end of the day, clients are going to expect a certain level of efficiency and are unlikely to pay for certain inefficiencies. So there's always a pressure to keep certain costs low, and that's where legal technology can really be effectively leveraged to sort of get the most value out of your time. And we'll move to the next relevant model rule, which is the duty of confidentiality. And specifically, Section C states that a lawyer shall use reasonable efforts to prevent the inadvertent or unauthorized disclosure of information related to the representation of the client. And one way that's relevant to legal technology is in regard to typical attorney workflows and the realities of how lawyers practice law. Again, I remember the first thing that often happened when I was brought up to speed on a client matter was a partner or more senior associate would say, check a certain previous client's matter from a few years ago because there was a similar case, and let's use that as the starting point. So we as lawyers generally don't want to start from a blank sheet of paper. We want to start from an existing precedent. And again, this isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's a way to be more efficiently, but it has to be done right, because there's a lot of risks associated with this workflow, which we'll go into a little more detail on here shortly. But similar to the Steph Curry example, some data can get left behind from existing precedent and included in a version that's created for the new client, or sometimes there can be mistakes or even hidden information in that new document that you don't want other people to see. And legal technology helps avoid sort of both the visual mistakes and also some of the hidden data that can be embedded in a lot of legal documents. And that document should be cleansed before it's sent to the client. So with that, I'm going to pause here for a moment, and we're going to go into our first poll question. You should see a poll pop up on your screen, and we'll give everybody a minute here or so to enter a response. Again, there's no right or wrong answer for the poll questions, but it is important to complete the poll, so that way we can help track engagement and participation for CLE credit purposes. And I think, Alejandro, if you can let me know when we've hit around 100%.
Yeah, we're at 75 at the moment. So thank you everyone for chiming in. Looks like we still got a few folks, still at 75% here.
All right, so give everybody a couple more seconds. Please do enter your response so we can track attendance and engagement.
We're about at 81% now.
Okay, and Alejandro, I can't see the poll results. I'm not sure if you can, but this was in regard to leveraging legal technology. What are some of the results you're seeing, Alejandro?
Yeah, based on the 81% that has voted, thank you everyone for that. It looks like 92% was response for yes, and then we have 8% for no. So thank you everyone for chiming in and giving us your response.
All right, thank you. Yep. So now we'll go ahead and so we've talked a little bit about sort of the importance of technology and legal technology in particular. We're going to move on now to sort of talking about the existing workflows or manual workflows that attorneys tend to follow, and why it's risky. So here we have a visual here, sort of my attempt at showing the current drafting process for drafting documents. As I mentioned earlier, we as lawyers don't typically start from scratch, especially if we already have a precedent that's been successful. So we find that precedent, then we unwind it by removing the previous client's information, and we incorporate information that's relevant to the current client and the new matter. And then once that's been added, we circulate it for internal review and additional updates. And this can have a few different iterations. The final draft then gets created, and that needs to be formatted and styled appropriately. Then there's the final review and proof, and it's sent out the door either to the court or client or other counsel, while keeping in mind that this seems like a simple, straightforward process, but in reality, it has multiple work streams, and it's typically done under a lot of pressure and short timelines, creating a stressful environment for this sort of detailed work to be under. There are a number of different traps that can come up during this process, ranging from leaving previous client information in the document, incorrectly typing new client information into the document, or improper styling and formatting, leaving in that hidden data that I mentioned earlier that you don't want the other side to have access to. And so we'll sort of go over some of the mistakes that can happen under this sort of intense pressure of getting this document out the door in the appropriate format. And this is just a reminder, similar to the Steph Curry example, kind of a fun quote here: to learn from the mistakes of others, because you can't live long enough to make them all yourself. And here's some examples of some mistakes, and we should learn from them so that we don't make the same ones. So the first one here is an opinion from the US Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit. And this is an example of where a previous version of a document had an internal reference or a bookmark tagged, which was later removed from another part of the document. And when we know that when we do that in Word, this literally creates an error message stating that the bookmark cannot be found. Unfortunately, likely for the clerk of the court in this particular instance, this was the final version and it made it into the reporter and was published. It may not be the biggest or most costly mistake, but if you're working on a deal or a motion for your client and this sort of error ends up in your final work product, it's an embarrassing mistake to have to explain to the client. And this is an example here of the highest court of the land, the US Supreme Court, which further shows that no one's immune from making mistakes. In this example, the court misspelled laissez-faire, and the irony here is Justice Breyer, the author of the opinion, is fluent in French. and incorporated this French phrase into the opinion and ended up misspelling it, or at least not catching the mistake. Again, probably a clerk of the court, but probably should have been caught before it gets published by the US Supreme Court. Next one here is not a misspelling, but the incorrect word being used. So this is another sort of embarrassing example of the word statues being included rather than statutes, and the order then had to be revised to update the mistake. And this is an example of a simple spell check not catching the mistake, but a more advanced technology should catch this sort of mistake because of the context of the word was used incorrectly. And I think this one is my favorite because I'm still guilty of this from time to time. This is an example of an internal note reminding the drafter or the drafter's assistant to make a final change before sending it out the door. And it ended up being included in the final version and made available publicly. So this is one of those examples of where you want to leverage technology to sort of prevent this sort of mistake from being sent out the door. And lastly, this is probably the most severe example. And this sort of touches on some of the stress and intense deadlines, and also using existing precedent that can come back to lead to some consequences here. A court reprimanded counsel in its opinion or order for various errors in that counsel's filings, and even mentioned that it seems like the attorney is working on multiple similar matters and repurposing the work for other cases, but leaving the incorrect information in the filings. This is one where the impact on your practice can be actually real and harmful. So now we'll get into a little bit of mitigating the risk. We talked about some of the mistakes that we can see from manual workflow. So we'll tie it now to ways in which we can mitigate that risk by leveraging technology. And today we're talking primarily in the context of drafting and review, and the importance of incorporating legal technology to assist in that process. At the end of the day, written legal documents are a big part of an attorney's work product and the deliverable for the client. Whether it's in the form of a transactional agreement, a motion that leads to a favorable court order, or a legal memo, or other form of documentation, that's the work product of an attorney that clients are paying for, and a critical part of effectively representing your client. So we believe drafting technology is an important area to stay current and mitigate risks. And again, tying it to comment 8, this presentation is in the spirit of complying with comment 8 and staying current with legal technology, so you can avoid those manual workflow risks and mistakes by leveraging technology. And so I'll quickly show here, example of how a legal tool can catch a mistake that was left in a document, and Alejandro will give us a brief discussion on that.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, David. And like David had mentioned, we use legal software to help identify some of these items, like we saw in the previous example in the beginning of our presentation with Steph Curry and Kevin Durant. When we're looking for these type of items, we're not thinking of the other items that might be living within our document. So that's why legal software can come into play and help identify some of these items. Here, as we can see here, we actually written 1 million, but actually in the parentheses, we have 100,000. So we want to make sure that we bring these items to your attention, but at the end of the day, we'll require you to decide what needs to be fixed going forward. Next slide, David. And then also, here's a perfect example, right? If they had access to our software even before the deal for Steph Curry was presented, you can see here on the right-hand side how we were able to capture that information and avoid that $14 billion mistake. As we go through our demonstration portion in our presentation later on, we can actually see some more real-world examples as well. But following that, there's also going to be another poll here. So in the upcoming poll here, the poll is more of, do your clients expect legal technology to be utilized to increase efficiency and lower costs? So feel free to chime in with your yes or no answer. Participation is required, but we'll give you folks maybe a minute or so to give us your opinion here.
And so again, everybody, if you could take a moment here to enter in your response, we'll give everybody a little bit of time before we move on to the next section.
Yep. Looks like we're about 38%. Thank you everyone who has chimed in. Awesome. Just a few more moments here. We're about 75%. Just 10 more seconds here. Just feel free to add your response there. Okay, it looks like we're about at 75%. Let us know if you have any more opinions, but it looks like we've closed the poll. So it looks like 83% responded with yes, we do expect our clients to be utilized to increase efficiency and lower cost, while 17% stated no. But thank you everyone for your participation.
All right, yes, thank you. So now we're going to talk a little bit about, why is legal technology particularly important right now? And so with that, we're just going to touch on here a few sort of realities in the current state of the market and the industry about what's required of attorneys. And this visual here comes from the T-shaped lawyer, and it's a great illustration of the areas that are necessary to be an effective attorney. So, in addition to model rules requirements, CLE requirements, and market pressures, there's also just the reality of what's required to be an effective modern lawyer. There's a few different versions of this sort of visual out there, but essentially in the center, we have our traditional skills of what's necessary to be a lawyer around negotiation, problem solving, being analytical, and really legal knowledge. But you can see here it's starting to expand horizontally for these non-traditional skills as well. So things like cross collaboration, innovative thinking, complex problem solving, and then also tech and data. So again, there are specific rules requiring technology competency, and there's also sort of the realities of what maybe clients might expect, but then there's also just what's necessary in this day and age to be an effective lawyer, and we're really seeing non-traditional skills starting to expand. The next one has to do with common and typical ways in which attorneys tend to work. So in this example, we're seeing the pilots using a checklist before they take off, and this is really similar to the ways in which attorneys tend to operate. So typically there are certain processes or steps that are followed in some consecutive or sequential order, or others might just be concurrent and just need to happen. So as a result, we see a lot of checklists in the legal profession, and oftentimes this might be either in a senior tenured attorney's head. Other times they might have it kind of written down somewhere to help keep them on track. Let's say in a large M&A deal, to make sure we get through the full checklist. But rather than having these materials just in someone's head or in somebody's notes, legal technology can be utilized to ensure that all the steps that you need to get done for your deal or your matter do in fact get done. And the next one here is sort of the elephant in the room. I think a technology presentation right now, wouldn't necessarily be complete unless we at least mention Gen AI sort of the elephant in the room here. So we'll spend a few minutes now discussing Gen AI and some interesting statistics about it over the past year or two. And sort of the first development is from over the summer here. And this is the ABA's formal opinion, I believe, 512. And it provides guidance on the ethical use of Gen AI tools. And I won't go into the details on this, but essentially it covers a lot of the same topics that we discussed today around, attorney competency, confidentiality, communicating with clients, supervising work product, and then also advancing meritorious claims, ensuring candor with the court, and then charging reasonable fees. So if you haven't already, you may want to consider giving this a read because as we're going to see here in a moment, generative AI and technology in general is becoming increasingly popular. And on that note, you can see here, this is a chart showing the rate at which, or the speed with which ChatGPT adopted 100 million users. For example, you can see Netflix, it took 18 years and it only took ChatGPT 2 months. And the point here is that lawyers are no exception, and clients aren't either. There are pressures to adopt, learn technology to increase efficiency. So, we're seeing this, we're seeing technology advancing rapidly and attorneys being pressured to stay current with it. This is another example here. And this is another chart showing that Gen AI is becoming increasingly popular, and there are expectations developing that it'll be used in the legal profession. This is a survey from 275 legal professionals. On the left, you can see 62% of them believe that the effective use of Gen AI in the legal profession will separate law firms in the next 5 years. And on the right side, it's broken down between law firm respondents and in-house. And you can see 61% of in-house counsel, which are typically law firm clients, believe that the effective use of Gen AI in the legal profession will separate law firms. So it's just another indication of the realities of client expectations and market pressures. Some more quick stats here. This is a survey from earlier this year around Gen AI in the legal profession. 90% of legal executives expect their investment in Gen AI to increase. 53% of the AmLaw 200 have already invested, and 45%, nearly half, are already using Gen AI for legal work already. 43% have a dedicated budget, and 80% of the Fortune 1000 expect to see a reduction in billing. And then here, I think this is an interesting chart showing some of the use cases for Gen AI in the legal profession. I think it's interesting to note here, particularly in the context of today's discussion, that many of the leading use cases are related to legal document drafting and review. You can see drafting, templating, drafting legal contracts, summarizing legal narratives, reviewing legal documents, negotiating, redlining. So some of the top use cases here are related to drafting and review. So this is sort of the next area that I think we'll see a lot of development. All right. So we touched on briefly how legal technology drafting tools can help mitigate risks and enhance your practice. A little earlier, Alejandro gave a brief kind of overview. Here, we'll go into a little bit more depth on how to leverage legal technology tools to increase efficiency, and we'll show here our drafting tools that are available to leverage. And I'll turn it over to Alejandro here. I think I'll need to share the presentation.
Great, thank you, David. And meanwhile, David is kind of switching the presentation there. We can see here on the screen how the Litera desktop or Litera draft ribbon is structured, where we cover the full drafting process from start to finish. So as I bring up my screen, of course, today we won't cover all of the Litera desktop, but just want to give you an understanding and how the presentation and some of the items or our legal tech can help identify these items for us. So by now, we should be able to see that Word document looks like it's coming loud and clear. So in this case, I wanted to mention how we have access to the application. So as we can see, I'm within Microsoft Word. So what that means for me is anytime I have a document open, doesn't matter if it's internal, external, or if it comes from a document management system. The rule of thumb is as long as we have that document open within Microsoft Word, we're going to have access to the tools. And specifically, that's going to live within the Litera tab there at the top, similar to that screenshot that we saw a few moments ago. And like I mentioned, Litera Draft covers the full drafting process from start to finish. As we can see there at the top left, we have our Litera Create, which is more of that templating side of things, content repository. We also have our check right in the middle, where it's more of that automated drafting and review, which we're going to focus mainly on for today. But also, as everyone's favorite, we also have our comparison product, right? I need to see the changes between version 1, version 2. Show me those changes. That's where Litera Compare can come into play. And then lastly, we won't cover this for today, but anytime we're going to send a document externally, I want to make sure that that metadata that's left over is scrubbed, the author name, the track changes, the comments, the template that it came from, so on and so forth. But for today's narrative, we're going to talk about Litera Check right in the middle. And the way that this works is I can go ahead and click on Analyze there at the top. What it's going to do, it's going to scan my document, and then it's going to provide me with a bunch of tiles. That's what we call each respective square. And within each respective tile, it's going to help identify specific information. And I also wanted to quickly mention that, yes, these tools are practice agnostic. So for more of our corporate side, transactional side of things, we can see we have options to review our definitions, right? If there's any issues within them, maybe I just want to quickly review what's defined within my document. But also for my litigation folks, I promise I didn't forget about you, but we can also quickly review if there's any citation issues within our document, or maybe I need to generate a table of authorities. If I navigate there at the top within that check ribbon like we saw before, we can see that I have that TOA, or the table of authorities functionality, also available in here. So if I need to review my citations or generate that table of authorities, we have access to that workflow as well. But for today, we're going to keep it high level, right? There is going to be a QR code that we can schedule a follow-up demonstration. So if we want to see a little bit more in detail, by all means, you will definitely have access to. But let's kind of go through some of these tiles and identify some of the issues that this tool can identify. So for example, I'm going to navigate to our Define Term Issues tile. And as we can see, it's going to help identify items that might be wrong within my definitions. But you might be wondering, Alejandro, what kind of information does this provide? And if we look here on the right-hand side, we can see that we can identify items as, hey, you use this, but it hasn't been defined. But for the other side of the coin, hey, I have something defined, but I haven't used it in the document. This is also going to let me know as defined, not used. So let's look at an example here for both. So here, I have closing date. And if I look here on the right-hand side, it's stating that I've used this, but I haven't defined it within my definitions list, definitions table, or maybe even in line. And as we can also see, I've used this term 7 times. So what I can do is I can use those navigation arrows to go through each instance, nothing fancy there. But let's just say hypothetically, I come to a realization, I reviewed each of the term closing date, and I need to define this term. Normally, the way we would do this today without any software is go to our definitions list, definitions table, add the return, make sure that it's in alphabetical order and it matches our formatting, then of course, type manually. But I can actually save some time. If we look here on the right-hand side, I can go ahead and click on define as well. And as soon as I do that, as you saw, I didn't do anything extra, but it's able to put closing date in the correct alphabetical order. Then it's also going to leave a placeholder. So if I want to come back to this later, by all means I can, or I can always jump back into the document and add that definition. So I can say, shall mean XYZ, whatever it may be. But also, not sure if we've noticed, but on the right-hand side, and this is for all of the tiles, not just specific to this one, but anytime I fix any of those items there, the pane will automatically refresh. So I don't have to second guess myself and say, well, did I fix that? Did I add that definition? Once we go ahead and resolve one of these items here, it will update that list and remove it going forward. So now I know what's been fixed and what's still left over. But as we saw, right, we saw an example of something that has been used but not defined. But what about the other side of the coin? What if something has been defined, but I haven't used it in the body of the document? And I want to quickly talk about two scenarios here. Let's just say for the first scenario, I have the term parties here. As we can see here on the right-hand side, it's showing up as defined, not used. If I look at the body of our document, we can see that it's defined there. But for the first scenario, this is not a problem. I'm still working on my document, so I'm still adding content as I'm going through it. So what I can do here, and again, this applies for all the tiles here, but I can select that particular item there, and then below, there's an option that's called reviewed. So I'm telling the application, hey, this is not a problem. Let's focus on the other items going forward. That's for the first scenario. For the second scenario, let's say, yeah, I finished drafting my document and I realize that I don't need to have parties. So in this case, as we can see there on the right-hand side, there is an option to remove that definition. And as soon as I do that, it's going to remove it off our definitions list. And as we also saw there a few moments ago, it updated the list so we can see that parties is no longer an item. So hopefully that quick example of the defined term issues was helpful there. There are a few more items I do want to cover. I do want to spend maybe about 8 more minutes here. So the next one, and this falls back into that story that David had mentioned about Steph Curry and Kevin Durant, is if we do reuse our previous matters, previous work products, and we want to identify that leftover client information, that's where this namespace can come into play. So namespace is going to help identify that client-specific information. Company names, dates, negotiables, emails, phone numbers, so on and so forth. And I have it all available within this tile. So if I need to quickly verify my company names, my addresses, negotiables, I can quickly verify that in here. So instead of using find and replace and going line by line, this is a lot easier to digest. But also, as a common theme of Litera Check, what we're looking at here in this few moments, is the way it works is it's able to recognize the patterns we use in language to identify this information. And what I mean by that is here below, I have an example of a company name called Mater Cook and Jackson. I use it twice, nothing fancy there. But if I scroll to the top, the tool's able to recognize and say, hey, I've noticed you used Mater Cook and Jackson before, but it looks like you misspelled it, at least in this instance. So if so, you want to change the D to the E or whatever it may be. So in this case, maybe I was in cruise control, maybe I copied and pasted incorrectly, whatever the reason may be, I can always go back into my documents and resolve that misspelling that I had for Mater Cook and Jackson. Some additional items that we can also identify in here are any incorrect dates. So if we don't have our calendar pulled up there in the bottom right, or if we're using a specific app, if we look here, Tuesday, April 16th, It makes sense. However, if I look here on the right-hand side, it actually looks like April 16th is on a Monday, not a Tuesday. So if we're working on a specific agreement or on a specific start date, whatever it may be, we want to ensure that we're able to identify this information. So in this case, like we saw before, I'm going to go ahead and remove the Tuesday and add Monday going forward. So now I know I have the correct date going forward. And as we're going to see there in a few moments, we saw how I was able to update that pane and quickly remove it off our list. So I do want to cover at least 2 more tiles here and just kind of show you a quick understanding of how some of our applications work. Is we're going to jump into the editing mistakes there in the top right. So for that example that we saw within our David's presentation about the 100,000 or the 1 million, let's talk about it a little bit more in this context. So like we saw, the tool's able to recognize and say, hey, I've noticed you wrote 1 million, but do you have in those parentheses? That doesn't match. Is this what you meant? So the reason I wanted to bring this example again is you might be wondering, Alejandro, how come this one doesn't have an option to click on fix or resolve, or it doesn't give me much guidance, but it just lets me know there's an issue? And that's how this Litera check works, is we don't know what the context is, and we don't know what the end result will be, but we want to let you know and say, hey, this doesn't make sense. So in this case, if I meant 1 million, okay, add the comma, the extra 0, I'm good to go. Or maybe I actually meant 100,000 instead. So I want to get rid of that 1 million and add the 100,000 instead. Some additional components as well that we can identify within here. We can also identify any missing punctuation. So here, I know this one's a little hard to see, but I'm using an opening quote, but I'm missing the closing for the word obligations of GG parties, as you can see there. Also, any inconsistent punctuation. So as we can see here, I have a curly and a straight quote. I know there's a friendly debate of which one to use over the other. I promise we don't forget about either. But we go based off the common theme. So if we look here on the right-hand side, curly quotes is used more often than straight quotes. So if I want to keep this document consistent, I want to make sure that I want to use curly quotes going forward. And then lastly, as we can see there at the bottom, we can also detect any incorrect spacing. Again, based on the theme of the document, if we're using a single space versus a double space, or vice versa, this is either going to say, hey, you need to add another space, or you need to get rid of that extra space. I do quickly want to just explain that within this citation issues for my litigation folks, I promise I didn't forget about you, but within the citation issues, we're able to identify if there's any major or minor discrepancies within our citations. If a citation's out of order, right? So if we're using the short form before the long form, this is also going to let me know. But if I also wanted to take a step further, and maybe I will actually want to see all of my citations, or hey, I need to generate a table of authorities. If I navigate back to this check ribbon like we saw in the beginning, I click on Analyze to bring up this pane, but I can also click on TOA, or Table of Authorities. And for the folks who've used our best authority, we still have access to that here as well. So if I want to quickly double check my citations, or maybe I need to make some modifications, or like I mentioned before, I need to generate that table of authorities, by all means, we'll also be able to cover that workflow. And then the last thing I wanted to mention here is we also have some repair capabilities. So as we saw there on the right-hand side, we were able to identify those single action items, but maybe I want to apply some cleanup to the entire document. I know we don't have enough time to cover some of these items here, but we're able to fix any numbering issues and cross-references. I can also have the ability to create a table of contents. I know those can be difficult. PDF cleanup, as we all know, when we convert a PDF into a Word document, we're left over with a bunch of oddities. So this PDF cleanup is going to give us a better starting point in which then I can add my content, my styles, formatting, so on and so forth. But specifically, I actually have some additional cleanup options that I can apply to the entire document. So if I copy and paste often, I want to make sure my font type or font size is consistent, maybe the spacing between words or sentences as well. Again, that friendly debate between curly to straight or vice versa. And if I want to rule out any highlighting, drawings, or even empty paragraph marks, that's also another option. So I really hope this 1,000-foot view of some of our legal software that we have to offer here at Litera was helpful. There is going to be a follow-up QR code. If we want to have a more in-depth demonstration of some of these products, there is going to be a QR code that we can schedule that going forward. So before we finish the demonstration portion, there is going to be one last poll here that we're going to go ahead and show. So I'll give that a few moments. Perfect. So as we can see here, just for the sake of our CLEs, are you interested in any additional Litera CLEs on legal technology? Again, folks, feel free to add your comments there. It does help with the participation, and we're able to track that as well. We'll give you folks a few seconds here. We're about 50%, so thank you all who has voted so far.
And Alejandro, if you want to answer the question, is Litera Check different than Litera Contract Companion?
Ooh, that's a great question. So we do have Contract Companion built into Litera Check. So those tiles that you saw are going to be familiar, and that's where we're able to bring it in from our Contract Companion piece. But the results from either application are still going to be the same. So hopefully that question, excuse me, hopefully I was able to answer your question there as well. And it looks also we're about 83%. So again, are we interested in additional CLE provided from Litera? It looks like 87% said yes, and then about 13% said no. So again, thank you all for your participation. I'll give it back to you, David, to do our closing here.
All right, great, Alejandro. I think that was great. Really touched on sort of a lot of the common drafting issues that can come up during a manual workflow. Can everybody see? Can you see my screen here? I took the control back, and I'm showing sort of our suite of legal technology solutions available. So you can go to litera.com and get more information about those. And then also, as Alejandro mentioned, here's our QR code. If you're interested in a more in-depth demonstration, or if you want to reach out with to get more information about any products, feel free to scan that, and somebody will get in touch to provide a more in-depth demonstration or answer any product-related questions you have. Lastly, we'll give you a second in case anybody's scanning it. And then lastly, I do want to close here with final kind of housekeeping reminders. So again, if you've met the CLE participation requirements, so if you've individually registered and completed the polling throughout, you'll receive an email requesting that you complete an affidavit, and then your CLE certificate will be issued. Again, we've applied for California, Illinois, New Jersey, New York, and Pennsylvania. If they've been approved by the time you get that affidavit, the certificate will say approved. If not, it'll say applied for, and then when the approval is granted, you'll automatically get an updated CLE certificate that states approved. In most other states where we haven't applied, I believe the CLE certificate will say self-apply, and you can self-apply following the regulations and guidance for that state's self-application requirements. Two quick things. If you have any other questions about our CLE program, you can please reach out to cle@litera.com. And then finally, as you exit the course today, you should see a survey pop up, and we would love to have your feedback. So please do take a moment to fill out the survey. We will read it. As we grow our CLE program, your input is really critical. So please do take a moment to fill it out. We will read it and take it into consideration. So with that, I'll give folks a minute for any other questions. If not, I think that about wraps it up.
I think we're good on questions. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
All right. Thank you,
Awesome.
everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Be safe. Take care. Bye-bye.